Hey, welcome back to Cool Quotes. Today we're going to change things up and dive into the darker, freakier side of old Hollywood. With the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court, abortions are back in the news. And this led me to compile a list of stories from old Hollywood that you probably didn't know, and some are very shocking. We tend to look back at the golden age of Hollywood as a time that was both more elegant and more innocent. But in old Hollywood, abortions were more standard than many people might think. Even though the procedure was highly illegal and very dangerous at the time, the Hollywood actresses did have access to them, and this was due in part because of the morality clauses that they were forced to sign in their contracts. You see, the movie studios of the time were concerned that their star actresses would become pregnant out of wedlock, which could tarnish or completely ruin their reputation. So they teamed up together in 1922 and brought in Will H. Hayes. Now, Will in 1920 had just successfully managed a campaign for Warren Harding, who won the presidency. And then Will became the Postmaster General of the United States. So when they brought Will in, he created the Motion Picture Production Code, which was initially known as the Hayes Code. But he also created these morality clauses that were forced into the contracts for all of the actresses. And in there, it stipulated, if you become pregnant out of wedlock, the movie studio has a say in how this will go. And if you do not go along with what the studio says, the studio can end your contract and sue you for the money they've already paid you, plus damages. So basically, their career would be ended and they would be financially ruined. Keep in mind that the contract also stipulated that the actresses had to get permission from the studio before they got married. It seems they wanted their sex symbols always available and unwed, and they wanted their sweethearts to be pure as the driven snow and never have sex. So here are a few cases and how things played out. The beautiful Jean Harlow. Well, it seems that she fell in love with William Powell and wanted to get married. But MGM stepped in and said, absolutely not. It's in your contract and we say no because you will lose your sex appeal to the public. So she had to just continue dating William. And eventually she got pregnant by William, and this brought in a new situation. When she told MGM that she was pregnant, she truly believed that they would let her finally get married. But instead they repeated the same thing. A wife and a mother cannot be a sex symbol. You have broken your contract, and if you do not want to be released, you will follow our orders. After a week of emotional despair, she finally gave in to the studio and let them take control. So they brought in Howard Strickling, who had become known as the Hollywood Fixer. If you had a scandal, he could make it go away. If you had a pregnancy, he could make it go away. He booked her into the Good Shepherd Hospital under the name Miss Jean Carpenter, and she was scheduled to have an appendectomy. Now, she was in room 826 and only seen by her 2 private doctors and a private nurse. When she left, there was no talk of a pregnancy. All she had was an appendectomy. In 1931, Joan Crawford was estranged from her husband, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Now, they both had not been approved for a divorce yet because they were under contracts with movie studios. So they had to separate secretly for a while. And during this time, she started to secretly date Clark Gable. Now, eventually she started to get back with her husband and they were going to make it work, which was great. But she was already pregnant with Clark Gable's child. Now, she knew that the timelines wouldn't add up correctly, and she didn't want to do this to her husband, so she told the studio. And again, they brought in Howard Strickling, and he booked her into a hospital for some rest and relaxation from being overworked. And when she left, there was no talk of pregnancy, and her husband never knew. In 1941, at the age of 19, Judy Garland married the bandleader David Rose without the approval of MGM. Well, they found out within 24 hours and they ordered her back to work, and she could not ever mention that she was married, and he better not mention it either. It was to be kept hush hush. The only way she got away with this was because she was such a popular star. They didn't want to end her contract. Now, later in the year, when she became pregnant by her husband, that's when things changed. They collaborated with her mother and arranged for her to have an abortion. They brought in Howard Strickling, and he changed things this time because she was such a huge star, she would be recognized anywhere, so they did it in a private doctor's office. Now, just 2 years later, Judy became pregnant again, but this time the father was Tyrone Power. And again, the studio stepped in and said, absolutely not. America's sweetheart cannot be pregnant. So they forced her to have a second abortion. Now, later in life, some of the people that were close to Judy during this time claimed that it was after the second abortion when they saw a mental change in her, and she was never really quite the same. Now, Tyrone Power also got Lana Turner pregnant. So again, Strickling arranged for an abortion, and he uses the same doctor every time. And this guy got known around Tinseltown, and the actresses would refer to him as Dr. Killcare, as a playoff of Dr. Kildare. It's kind of creepy because they would say, don't get pregnant, or Dr. Killcare, I have to pay you a visit. A couple years later, Lana Turner became pregnant again. This time the father was band leader Artie Shaw. So Strickling arranged for Dr. Killcare to meet her on her publicity tour in Hawaii. They actually performed the procedure in her hotel room. And in his rush to get there so quickly, Dr. Killcare broke his bottle of anesthesia. But they went ahead with the abortion. Now, Lana's mother was there, and she said that at one point she had one hand over Lana's mouth to muffle the screams, but for most of it, she had both hands. They were so loud. Despite how horrible and painful this experience was, she was ordered back on the set of Ziegfeld Girl 1 week later, and when she received her next paycheck, she had a $500 deduction for the procedure. Now, Loretta Young's story is a little different. She told the studio that she was pregnant with Clark Gable's child, and the affair was not consensual. And if they tried to force her to have an abortion, she was going to tell the whole world. Well, they brought in Strickling the fixer, and he had to devise a special plan here. He told her that if she didn't mention anything about Clark Gable, that they would allow her to keep her contract and career going. They would also not force her to have an abortion, but she was also not going to have a baby. And she's like, what? And he says, here's how it goes. We are going to send you overseas to live in someplace very nice throughout the duration of your pregnancy. We are going to tell the press that you are on vacation. She agrees, and off she goes. Now, as time went on, the press starts to think, this seems like an awful long vacation, so they're a little suspicious. But once she missed her sister's wedding back here, they really started digging. Now, the studio and Strickling went ahead and headed this off. They sent their own press agents over there to do an interview with her to sort of explain why she hadn't came back yet. And they knew they had to have pictures too, and by this time she was looking pretty pregnant, so she laid on a bed and she had pillows all up around her so you couldn't tell. And this was sort of a fake fluff piece that they sent out to the press, and that kind of calmed things down. But there was more. They told her, we still can't have it known that you had a child. And she's like, huh? Strickling says, well, we still can't explain who the father is, so you can't just have a child of your own. So what we're going to do is once the child is born, we're going to place it into this adoption agency, and then you are going to announce that you are looking to adopt a child, and you are going to adopt your own child. Now, things didn't go exactly that smooth. The child was born, healthy, they placed it into the adoption agency, but then things got a little screwy, and the paperwork and timing, it took so long. It was 8 months before she could get her own child adopted. And at one point, she was afraid they were going to let someone else adopt her child. So it kind of turned into a fiasco, but it all worked out in the end. And she eventually told the story and says, this is crazy. Now, Bette Davis has a different opinion on this. She says that in 1934, when she became pregnant and the studio forced her to have an abortion, it worked out in her favor because later that year, she got to play Mildred in Of Human Bondage, which earned her her first Oscar nomination and sent her off to superstardom. She says for her, it really did work out well. It kept her career on track so that she could catch her big break. And then, later in life, she did have 3 children, so she didn't miss out on having a family. Unfortunately for Mexican screen siren Lupe Velez, her story has a tragic ending. In 1944, when she found out that she was pregnant by her lover Harold Raymond, the studio stepped in and strictly told her that she needed to have an abortion. When she told him that she would not do that because it is against her Catholic religion, he told her that the studio was now going to terminate her contract. Distraught by hearing this, she didn't reverse her decision. She stood strong. But when she went home and told Harold that she was pregnant, he told her that he didn't want a baby and he didn't want anything to do with her, and he left. Now, this was just too much for her. He didn't show back up. 2 days later, she was in such a dark place. She took every pill in the house, laid down, and ended her life. Man, these studios had way too much control over the health and well-being of their actresses of the time. It's just insane to think about that. Now, you know, they also did a similar thing to a few men. Check out this video above about Burt Ward. The story's pretty darn shocking. These studios were out of control.